Aegon III was a solemn boy, but was undeniably handsome, taking the best parts of both his parents, Rhaenyra and Daemon, lean of face and form, with the silver-white hair and purple eyes of a Targaryen, while his young queen was also a beautiful child, sharing that Targaryen look. Their wedding was as lavish as a spectacle the Seven Kingdoms had seen since the coronation of Aegon II in the Dragon Pit only a few months prior. All that was lacking this time were dragons, something that would define House Targaryen for the next 150 years. There would be no triumphant flights around the city walls for this king, no majestic descent upon the castle yard, and the more observant made note of another absence. The Dowager Queen, Alicent Hightower, was nowhere to be seen, though as Jaehaerys' grandmother, Alicent ought to have been present. As Aegon was still but 10 years of age, the new king's first act was to name the men who would protect and defend him, and rule for him until he came of age. Sir Willis Fell, the sole survivor of the Kingsguard of Viserys' time, was made Lord Commander of the White Swords, Sir Marsden Waters as his second. As both men were considered greens, the remaining places in the Kingsguard were filled with blacks. Sir Tyler Lannister, recently returned from Myr, was made Hand of the King, whilst Leowyn Corbray was named Protector of the Realm. The former had been a green, the latter a black. Over them was the Council of Regency, consisting of Lady Jane Arryn of the Vale, Lord Corlys Velaryon of Driftmark, Lord Ronald Westerling of the Crag, Lord Royce Caron of Nightsong, Lord Manfred Moodon of Maidenpool, Sir Torren Manderley of White Harbour, and Grand Maester Munkin, newly chosen by the Citadel to take up the Maester Orwell's chain of office. It is reliably reported to the point of fact that Lord Cregan Stark was also offered a place among the regents, but refused, wanting to return home to Winterfell with his new bride as winter was soon to set in. Conspicuous omissions from the council include Kermit Tully, Unwin Peake, Sabitha Frey, Thaddeus Rowan, Lionel Hightower, Joanna Lannister, and Benji Cott Blackwood. Only Lord Peake was truly angered by his exclusion, though. This was a council of regents, with Septon Eustace heartily approved of, 6 strong men and 1 wise woman, 7 to rule us on earth as the 7 above rule all men from their heaven. Mushroom was less impressed, however. 7 regents were 6 too many, he said. Pity our poor king. Some agreed that the fool had a point, and wondered how accord could ever be reached between so many regents. But despite the fool's misgivings, most observed seemed to feel that the reign of King Aegon III had begun on a hopeful note. The remainder of the year 131 AC was a time of departures, as the great lords of Westeros took their leave of King's Landing one by one to return to their own seats of power. The capital became noticeably quieter, to the joy of some and sorrow of others. Amongst the first to flee were the 3 widows, after bidding tearful farewell to their daughters, sons and siblings, and cousins, who would remain to serve the new king and queen at court as companions and hostages. Cregan Stark led his now much diminished host, thanks to Blackhally's plan to resettle them, up north along the King's Road within a fortnight of the coronation. 3 days later, Lord Blackwood and Lady Alysanne herself set out for Raventree, with 1,000 other Stark northerners as tail. Lord Lionel Hightower and his paramour, the Lady Sam, rode south for Old Town with their men, with Lords Rowan, Beesbury and Costain, Tarly and Redwine joining to escort His High Holiness to the same destination. Lord Kermit Tully and his knights returned to Riverrun, whilst his brother Sir Oscar set sail with his Stormbreakers for Tyrosh and the disputed lands. There was one who did not depart as planned, however, Sir Merrick Manderley, who had agreed to take the men bound for the Wall as far as White Harbour on his galley, North Star. From there, they were to proceed overland to Castle Black. On the morning the North Star was to sail, however, account of the Condemned revealed a man was missing. Grand Maester Orwell, it seemed, had experienced a change of heart as regard to taking the Black, bribing one of his guards to loose his fetters. He had changed into beggar's rags and disappeared into the city. Unwilling to linger any longer, Sir Merrick sentenced the guard who had freed Orwell to take his place, and the North Star sought the sea. By the end of 131 AC, Septon Eustace tells us a grey calm had settled over King's Landing and the Crown Lands. Aegon III sat the Iron Throne when required, but elsewise was little seen. The task of defending the realm fell on the Lord Protector, Leowyn Corbray, the day-to-day tedium of rule to the blind hand, Tyler Lannister. Once as tall and golden-haired and dashing as his twin, the late Lord Jason, Sir Tyland had been left so disfigured by Queen Rhaenyra's tortures that ladies new to court had been known to faint at the sight of him. To spare them, the Hand took to wearing a silken hood over his head on formal occasions. This was perhaps a misjudgment, for it gave Sir Tylan a sinister aspect, and before very long, the small folk at King's Landing began to whisper tale of the malign masked sorcerer in the Red Keep. Sir Tylan's wits had remained sharp, however. He might have expected to have emerged from his torments a bitter man, intent upon revenge, but this proved far from true. Instead, the Hand claimed a curious failure of memory, insisting he could not recall who had been black and green, whilst demonstrating a dogged loyalty to the son of the very queen who had sent him to the torturers. Very quickly, Sir Tylan achieved an unspoken dominance over Lewin Corbray. By law, both the Hand and the Lord Protector were subject to the authority of the Regents' Council. But the days passed, and the moon turned and turned again. The Regents convened less and less often, whilst the tireless, blind, hooded Tylan Lannister gathered more and more power to himself.